So are you in on the Wordle craze that's going around the last week here?
Wordle?
Wordle. So it's basically a game that's gone semi-viral just like in the last week.
No, I don't know.
It's just a word game where basically you have 6 guesses to guess the 5-letter word. And you just guess a 5-letter word, and it'll tell you if you have a letter, the yes that's in the word, no, these letters aren't in the word, or then if it's in the right place or not. So basically, it's going to be color coded either gray or yellow or green. What you need to change for your next guess.
Okay.
And so they just compete with friends. But the reason I think it's kind of taken off is it's just one puzzle a day, and everybody who logs on to their website, I don't even know if they have an app. It's just you go to the website, and everybody gets the one puzzle a day. So it's we're all competing against each other because that's all there is. You can't keep playing, blah, blah, blah. It's one puzzle a day for everybody in the country.
Okay.
Or everybody in the world that gets on there. So I've been competing with friends and seeing, it's basically see who can get it in the fewest amount of guesses kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
no, I haven't seen that, but I'm going to check it out now.
Okay.
If it's just one thing, that's
Yes. So you can't binge it.
Addicting where I'm going to be, I'm not going to be doing 50 of these in a row.
Right, you have to wait till the next day to do the next one. Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so I think that's probably why it kind of took off. The big controversy yesterday or 2 days ago at time of recording was no one apparently knew that you could repeat a letter within the puzzle. And so everyone's trying to figure it out, and then what? A double letter! And everyone's flipping out on Twitter, some people are calling that a spoiler, but then other people are well, good thing we know now that that's even a possibility because we thought it was, anyway. So
right,
it's fun. I'm sitting there, it's on my phone, but I'm sitting there with pen and paper, trying to plot it out. What could it be? So I don't waste guesses, and what are the possible word combinations? So you are very, very strategic with your guesses to try to get it in as few as possible. What's funny is the first time I didn't understand the rules, so I messed up the first time. But then the second time I did understand the rules, I got it on my second guess and just felt like a badass because I basically went. I don't remember what it was now. I went from stand, and it said the N is in the right place and the D is in the word, and then you don't have an S, a T, or an A. And I was like, okay, so let's move the D and try drink, and that was it.
Nice.
Yeah. So, anyway, welcome to History and Film. This is our bonus episode on the tragedy of Macbeth, which, at time of recording here, what is it today? January 15th. It just came out yesterday on Apple TV. Logan and I were actually hoping to go see it in theaters around Christmas, but it wasn't available, at least in Wichita. Was it actually available in Phoenix, or maybe at one theater?
Yeah, it was. There was a couple theaters in Phoenix, but they were both pretty far away.
Okay.
And I just I was like, well, because to be honest, when you texted me and said, "Oh, it's not available in Wichita," I was like, "Oh, okay." Honestly, that's kind of a relief because I'm telling you, over the last 2 years of pandemic movie watching, I've gotten so comfortable with seeing new releases on my own TV in my own home. It's the best. And honestly, might be the best. That and contactless delivery from Postmates, the best things to come out of the pandemic. Yeah, so when you texted me and said, "Oh, it's not available, no theaters in which to have it," I was like, "Oh, okay, that's actually kind of a good thing." I'm glad that I can just watch it when it comes out on streaming now. But it was, I mean, I technically probably could have gone and seen it a couple weeks ago.
But then I wasn't going to be able to see it until the 14th of January, so you're I'll just wait and do the same.
Yeah.
Okay, Logan, go ahead and get us rolling.
Yeah, so we're talking about the tragedy of Macbeth, which is Joel Coen without Ethan Coen. I think it's actually his first solo directed movie, if I'm not mistaken.
I was thinking there was one or two other projects that they weren't together on, but I couldn't tell you what those were off the top of my head. I'd have to almost go film by film to see. But yes, most of the films associated with the Coen brothers are Coen brothers. So you're right. There might be something obscure out there that's one of them by themselves, but this for sure is the biggest movie that was a single Coen brother, if there were even any others.
Oh, okay. So it looks like up to 2003, Joel actually received sole directing credit because of guild rule. It says guild rule that says you can't have two directors. You can't both be director unless you're a quote established duo. which I guess they must have become in 2003.
So like Raising Arizona was technically just Joel, but it was also both of them.
But that's a Coen Brothers movie.
Right. Okay. That's probably, and that may be why I was confused then too.
Anyway, this movie is actually just Joel Coen. Obviously, there's some stuff in here that is very Coen Brothers-ish, because, he's one of them. But it is just Joel Coen. Screenplay also Joel Coen, even though it's Shakespeare. Like, it's basically just Macbeth.
Yes, I would say though that like the writing then includes some of the stage direction, because obviously you're still making visual decisions, and there's going to be directions of what's occurring when lines are being said or what's happening when there's no dialogue period. So he filled in all that both as a director and a writer. But yeah,
so it's screenplay by Joel Coen based on Macbeth by William Shakespeare, and starring Denzel Washington as Macbeth, Frances McDormand as Lady Macbeth. And there's a bunch of other cast members that we'll talk about. Right. All the good ones that if you're familiar with the play. But yeah, I actually, just right off the bat, I want to kind of ambush you with this question.
Uh-oh.
Is this the best Shakespeare movie?
Oh, like this version of Macbeth, is it the best Shakespeare movie ever?
Yeah.
My knee-jerk reaction is no, but without a specific better one in mind. Does that make sense? So, I mean, a lot of people might say the Henry V with Kenneth Branagh, A Million Things with Laurence Olivier. Although actually, I'm not a big fan of Olivier's Shakespeare, ironically, because in my mind, it's too like in there's a version of Hamlet that Olivier did, the one Best Picture in like '48 or something, and to me, it felt like too stagey. Like Olivier's great, but he's a stage actor. And I kind of like when they do Shakespeare a little more organically, although there was times in this version where I wish maybe they had gone a little bigger with it. And so visually, I'll say yes, but I'll say it's maybe in the conversation for best Shakespeare film adaptation, but did not like blow me away in a way that I'm saying, oh yeah, absolutely, or anything like that. Or I almost feel like asking the question that you do feel that way.
We're going to differ on that, because to me, and this is different because I think we both approach Shakespeare differently. I would say that you are more of a Shakespeare appreciator than me. Like, for me, when I watch a movie that has Shakespearean dialogue in it, I'm just kind of like, oh God, like I feel like I'm in English class, and I mean that not to disrespect any English teachers, past or present.
One of whom we know is listening right now.
Shouts out to Mama Simmons.
Yeah.
But, it's like, it does. I don't connect with it. But in this movie, I was like, just I think the visuals the visuals and the performances were a big part of it, that I was like, okay, this is really cool. And it like the Shakespearean dialogue almost like played into kind of the weirdness for me.
Oh yes, because you're right. It to me it felt very much. Maybe it was just, I don't know if it's just the black and white and the kind of the stark visuals, but to me it felt like an Ingmar Bergman movie.
Yeah.
In all the best ways. So I visually this was probably the coolest looking movie of the year.
Oh, 100%. And visually, this is the coolest Shakespeare movie I've ever seen, because it's like a lot of times you get one of two things. Either it's basically a play that's on screen, or they go like super modern with it.
Right.
Like, there's the
Romeo and Juliet,
the Patrick
with DiCaprio.
Stewart Macbeth. There's the Leonardo DiCaprio Romeo and Juliet movie, where it's like Shakespearean dialogue, but it's, modern setting and stuff.
Right.
And I'm not really a fan of that either.
Okay.
There's a real dissonance there between like the modern setting and the Shakespearean dialogue that I just don't like. But this one was so cool looking, and I loved all of the cinematography and the production design were just so cool. It almost looked like the castle was like Dunsinane was like an MC Escher painting.
Oh yeah,
it was just like, oh, it was. I can't get enough of it. I absolutely loved the visuals in this movie.
I'm on board with that. So I'm almost like, hey, even if it just misses out a Best Picture nominee, and I think it'll probably be on the fence. It could get in, it could not. But I think it could and should win, whether it's cinematography or art direction or whatever you would call that. but his use of shadow and light is gorgeous. And I feel odd fixating on that, but ultimately for me, like, I don't know if this movie will necessarily, because I'm so story focused and all that, I don't know if this movie will necessarily make my top 10 of the year, and not because I didn't like it that much, more just because, well, I have the story memorized, so like there's no surprises. You know exactly what's going to happen. Like, I know,
right,
because you know the characters, you know the lines, and
down to all of the very specific, like, super famous lines that people have had memorized for hundreds of years. Yeah,
absolutely. So, and it may that's almost maybe a problem in my mind too. In my mind, I have maybe the preferred delivery I like for each line, and if they don't quite mesh up with my preferred delivery, and we're kind of all over the place here too. So I guess, do we have to say spoiler alert for a 400-year-old story?
I don't think we do.
Okay,
because it's like, I mean,
the argument is like, well, I'm not 400 years old. Like, I wasn't around.
I don't like, it's,
we're gonna spoil Macbeth. So yes, the plot is.
But honestly, like, no, it doesn't take, like, I knew, again, I know the story. I'm at least familiar enough with Macbeth to know generally what happened. And I would say, if you're not, I think it might actually add to the enjoyment of the movie to, like, go real quick to the Wikipedia page or a YouTube video or something and, like, read a plot summary of Macbeth before you go in, especially if you're not if you're not real keen on following the Shakespearean dialogue like me.
Yes.
You know, unless you kind of know what's going on, you don't really know what they're talking about. But then once you do know what's going on, it's like, oh, okay, I kind of get it.
Right. I would love to do a line-by-line breakdown with someone who's not super familiar with Shakespearean language and basically be like, okay, no, pause. What did he just say? Now think about that. You actually know what that means, even though you think you don't. And like all those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, so and I think that would actually add to the enjoyment of the movie.
Yes, yeah, because you have a hard time following, or like even just the actions of the characters. It's just like, it's definitely not what you're used to if you're not used to Shakespeare. And this is one too. So Macbeth is probably the play that I've seen the most different movie versions of. I've probably seen 6, 7, or 8 different movies of Macbeth, because it is kind of the one. I would say Hamlet's my favorite play, but Macbeth just tends to be shorter, and I kind of just like seeing the different takes on it more.
Okay. I was going to ask you that too, which you just answered, but how does this rank in your Shakespeare in general? Like, just the story of Macbeth versus Hamlet or King Lear? Or
Oh, right. This is probably my second favorite. Honestly, it's probably Hamlet, a little bit of a gap to Macbeth, and then maybe a big gap to everything else. Like, it's
okay.
They're the two at the top for sure.
Gotcha.
And I just the lines. So because I've probably been exposed more times to Macbeth, man, I tell you too. I think I mentioned when I talked about, it's probably in the Shakespeare in Love episode, I even quoted the tomorrow speech at the end right after he finds out his wife has died. And I just, man, it's so beautifully written and crafted. Anyway, so the more and more you hear this stuff, the more and more it makes sense, and the more you appreciate it. So I'm not a big acquired taste, like people who like coffee and beer and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know, it's garbage. Why do you even want to drink that? And they're like, it's an acquired taste. And I'm like, yeah, no thanks. But at the same time, I think that's kind of Shakespeare, where I can see it turning people off at first. But the more you drink your Shakespeare, the more you start to appreciate it and realize, oh, yeah, okay, I get it, I hear it, and there's a rhythm to it, and
I would say that's kind of the same thing for me. Which over the years, I'm still, like I said, I'm not like a huge Shakespeare guy or fan, but I have kind of grown to appreciate it more. Like, the more that I've seen.
Yeah. No, I think that's inevitable.
But also, it's the same way for me with these, like, I don't know, you know the word, like these strange and kind of out there, you know, quote unquote A24 movies. Like this, The Green Knight that just came out this year. Like, they had kind of similar vibes.
Okay.
And so that is also like an acquired taste thing, where it's like the first time. You know, if you're used to watching just your average summer blockbuster movies,
right,
and then you watch The Green Knight and you're like, what the hell is this?
Right, okay.
But then the more you watch it, you were like, oh, okay, I actually kind of you learn to appreciate that kind of stuff. I
Right,
think.
right. You could tell this was a low budget movie, relatively speaking.
Oh yeah,
but not in a bad way. It's almost like the brilliance of Joel Coen could get this made as an A24 movie for a limited budget because he's a brilliant filmmaker. And
yes,
if you didn't really kind of know much, you wouldn't realize that it was low budget. And I'm guessing the actors probably worked for less too, just to kind of get stuff like this doesn't get made with $100 million budget. It just won't get made.
Yeah. Speaking of the actors,
oh yeah,
what'd you think?
Good. So here again. My little critiques would be, so when you get like the Macbeth talking, Denzel and why do I always draw a blank on
Frances McDormand?
On Frances McDormand's name, like every time.
We've done that like 5 times on this podcast.
I'm a huge fan. I think her name in my mind, her name's just so mundane that I can't ever remember it. But so when they're talking, it kind of occurred to me, it's like, oh, this is Shakespeare with American accents, and how often have we seen Shakespeare with American accents? And then maybe just the fact that everybody it didn't seem like everyone was from the same world to me. Like everyone was just kind of bringing in their own accent, and it's kind of a hodgepodge, which I guess it's fine. It's Shakespeare. You also argue that, hey, on a play, you just kind of take the cast you have, and realism is kind of anyway. So I'm not saying it was bad. It's just something I noticed. And then also I felt like, so I talked about the method of delivery, and you can kind of do the big Laurence Olivier style Shakespeare, where it's like you're on a stage giving a soliloquy at all times, or you can do the kind of more understated, where you're saying the lines as if they're natural dialogue you would say anyway. And I felt like in this movie, it wasn't giving you consistently one or the other. It was kind of sometimes one and sometimes the other. So again, I'm not saying it as like I disliked it. Just maybe a minor critique that I noticed, and I do wish they had maybe picked a lane.
Yeah.
That's minor. Again, I really enjoyed this movie. I really did. The performances were really good. But like Brendan Gleeson as Duncan right at the beginning, I was just like, is this rehearsal? Like it almost looks like he was like did someone have a gun to Brendan Gleeson's head? Does he not want to be here? It was so deadpan that I was just like, all right, like that seemed odd to me. And then he kind of that was just kind of who the character was, and I think it'd probably be better the second time around too, as far as all this, because kind of know what decisions they're making, and you can kind of be more okay with it. Again, I sound like I'm like crapping on this movie. I really enjoyed it. It's just a different kind of experience when it's a story you have basically memorized. Like,
is it safe to say that you liked this movie, but you might not bring it up in your top 10 of the year episode we do in a couple months?
That's probably fair. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a borderline. I probably have 15 movies that are like, yeah, these are solid, and it might be right around that 11-12 mark right now. I'd have to look. Okay. I'd have to look. I still have some more to watch too, and I could decide to squeeze it into the 10 spot maybe. But problem is I'm all about original stories, and I'm like, I already know this story, so it's almost ineligible unless it just blew me away. But it can't blow me away because I already know everything's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Even though visually it was the best movie of the year, just to look at, it's the prettiest movie of the year.
Which I think might kind of inform why I liked this movie so much more than you did, even though I don't really like Shakespeare at all. And you're the Shakespeare guy. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I will say though, I do love a good Denzel Washington monologue.
Oh yeah.
And to see Denzel Washington doing Shakespeare monologue, it was there was some really special stuff.
Oh, he kills the tomorrow speech. Yeah. Again, the tomorrow is my favorite speech in this play, and he killed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. So the other little thing I was going to say on the Shakespearean language too. So it's very common in Shakespearean adaptations to prune, and you don't alter the text, but you take certain lines out to streamline it, or things that are anyway. So I'm not 100%, but as a more of an expert than you, I guess we would say. It seems that this appeared to my educated guess to be completely unedited. That this was line for line, word for word, the entire text, which is actually not the common way to do a Shakespearean adaptation.
Yeah, and I mean, I can count on probably one hand the number of times that I've seen on stage or in a movie an adaptation of Macbeth.
Right.
But just generally knowing what the story beats are, they were all there. It's not like they, left
No. But there's certain scenes where it's just like, wait, why is this minor character talking to this minor character about something that doesn't really matter? Yeah, those things usually get cut.
That's because that's in the play.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it does seem to be a full adaptation.
That actually is something that I did notice. So like the scene where there's the servant or whatever and the doctor talking about Lady Macbeth sleepwalking.
Right.
I mean, that's like, there's stuff in that needs to be in there for the story, because that's when she she's like, say she can't get the blood off her hands or whatever.
Right.
But that scene in the movie is like 6 or 7 minutes long, I think.
Right.
And it probably only needed to be like 3 minutes long.
Right. You only need 30 seconds to set up the out damn spot, and they basically gave minutes, because again, they were doing the full text. Right.
Yeah.
Or with the, it seemed to me pretty obvious that the old man that's kind of like the hermit is actually just the same actress playing the witch that plays the witch.
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's like that guy talking to that other kind of one that's playing both sides, and I'm like, this could be cut too, but and often is. That
actually reminds me, Catherine Hunter as the witches.
Okay, is that who that was?
Was awesome.
Yeah.
So good. And I really, really liked that it was
just same person.
It was just one person.
Yeah.
Oh god,
that was cool.
The scene where she's standing and then she has the two reflections. That was so
sick. Total Bergman. Like,
oh yeah,
Ingmar Bergman is like giving a slow clap for this film.
And she even has the the tight black hood over the white oval face. Like it's
Death and Seventh Seal. Like it's This is very much, it almost feels like one big homage to Seventh Seal, honestly.
Kind of, yeah. And I also really liked her in the double toil and trouble scene.
Yes.
Where she's sitting in the rafters, and instead of a cauldron, the floor just fills up with water.
Yeah.
And she drops all the stuff in, and it turns into basically the cauldron. Right. And then afterwards, all the water sinks back through the floor.
Yeah.
That was so sick.
No, yeah.
That was so cool.
Very cool. So, historical background, and we'll start with the story, and then we'll get into the play itself. It's kind of this is kind of a meta thing, or a Inception level thing, because you got the history of the story itself, but then the play is 400 years old and has its own history. So you kind of got a history of the story within the play, and then the play itself has its own history. So first, the larger historical context. So yes, Macbeth is based on an actual king of Scotland. And he did succeed Duncan, who had sons, and still was Macbeth. So the bullet points are kind of accurate. But it's also a time in Scotland where it's so long ago we don't know much about it. So Duncan was King of Scotland just like in 1035 to 1040 or 1034 to 1040.
Yeah. And he was actually a young guy, right?
Yeah, so he was born in
not old like in the...
Right. So he's born in 1001. So he's only 39 when he dies, not an old man. And he became king in 1034, and when his grandfather died. So Duncan's dad was not his claim to his throne. It was actually his mother, who was the previous king's daughter. And so when Malcolm II of Scotland died, his grandson Duncan becomes king and rules for just 5-6 years. And again, it's 1,000 years ago, so we don't have a lot of details. It sounds like his reign was actually fairly uneventful, but he did exist. He did have sons, Malcolm and Donalbain.
Looking into a lot of this stuff, it's like, man, Shakespeare really earned his money writing this play with all the stuff that happened, because in real life, not that much stuff happened. At least not that much stuff that we know for sure happened.
Right, and I'll get later into the play itself. I kind of want to do that after, or the order doesn't really matter. But Duncan did have two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, who we both see in the story there. And actually, why don't you then give us the background of Macbeth and how that leads into and compares to what we see in the film? Because that gets a little bit different. Specifically, there's a whole new character, Lulloch. And, well, I guess that's after.
Yeah.
That's after, but yeah. So talk about who Macbeth was and how he kind of related to Duncan.
So Macbeth in the play is based on an actual king of Scotland who was actually a kind of, not vassal king, but he... more mayor. I don't know if that's the right way to say that word, of Moray, which was like kind of a state under the control of the King of Scotland. And so Macbeth, or his actual Scottish name, which I'm gonna butcher, Macbethad Macfindlake, I think is like close to how you say that.
Yeah.
Was he was a noble in this little kingdom of Moray, which is like in the northern part of modern day Scotland, and he was actually involved in a conflict against Duncan. He wasn't, like friends with him like we see in the movie or in the play. He was actually attacked by Duncan, but then defeats him in battle, kills him in battle, and then takes the throne of Scotland that way.
Right. So there is a conflict, and it is Macbeth throwing Duncan by killing him, but not in the way we see in the play. Right.
Right. Not even close. And then he rules Scotland for 17 years, relatively peacefully and uneventfully.
Right.
I saw in one video I watched that he went on a pilgrimage to Rome, and really there's like not any evidence that he was this like tyrannical bad guy of a king. Actually the opposite. Like it
might have been Duncan that was the bad king.
Yeah, there was like stories of him like giving a bunch of money to peasants and stuff, and like he seemed like just a generally decent king who ruled for like 17 years in a mostly peaceful time where not much happened. I mean, he got overthrown in battle by Malcolm III, but like during his reign, it's not like he was going and conquering or, having all this political intrigue or anything. It really not that much happened during his...
Right. And so the question would be, what was Shakespeare's motivation to kind of switch that? And it deals with, and I'll get to it in more detail here at the end, but James I was the new king of England, and guess which one of these kings James I is descended from? Not Macbeth, Duncan. So who are you going to make the good guy, and who are you going to make the bad guy? Well, the king's ancestor has to be the good guy, and so hence the story of Macbeth as Shakespeare wrote it is born.
And I also saw that also has to do with how the character of Banquo was written. So Banquo, at the time, and then his son Fleance were thought to be like distant ancestors of the Stuart line of Scottish kings, which we talked about in the when we talked about Robert the Bruce. I think it was like his daughter, and then his daughter's husband's son. Like that was the first of the Stuart kings of Scotland.
Yeah.
And then that family, was the royal line, all the kings of Scotland, all the way up to James, and then now all the way down to Queen Elizabeth.
Right.
Have been rulers of Scotland since then. But now, I guess historians are pretty sure that Banquo never existed, and neither did Fleance, and they're completely fictional characters.
Right.
Made up for the Hollinshead Chronicles, which is what was the really, like, rough quotes historical document that Shakespeare based his characters on.
Yes, a couple. Oh, yeah. Basically, the Hollinshead Chronicles from 1587 was kind of basically where Shakespeare got his story of Macbeth. Although even that he changed quite a bit. That had like, instead of like ugly witches, it had like beautiful nymphs or fairies giving the prophecy. But it was still a quote history book that had fairies giving prophecies. So very much just a 16th century stylized kind of thing. And there may have actually been earlier 16th century book, like from the 1520s, that first actually had a reference to Banquo and Fleance, and then Hollinshead just kind of borrowed it from them. But so it made sense that, in Shakespeare's time, it made sense that you actually believed Banquo was real, because you essentially had two history books from the previous century that cited Banquo and Fleance. But then it was in like the early 1700s that historians were like, they just pulled that out of their butts, apparently, because we don't understand where they got that. It's all just made up. So, So at the time, they believed the whole Fleance getting away thing was to then go, and the whole prophecy that, thou shalt get kings, though thou be none.
Right.
They thought it was a cool little Easter egg, basically, at the time, but it turns out not to be the case. But Duncan is also an ancestor of James I, but not as closely tied to the Stuart line. All those kinds of things.
And I guess all of that to say, and the reason that I brought up Banquo in the first place is because at the time that Shakespeare wrote it, the historical record said that Banquo was actually like helping Macbeth with the killing of the king, which like if James the First is his descendant, doesn't look good if you're like, oh yeah, your ancestor was like a murderer and a usurper.
Right.
So he like changed Banquo for his play to
right.
make him more sympathetic because, you know, you got to do that when that's the king's kin you're talking about.
In the source material, Banquo is basically egging Macbeth on just like Lady Macbeth is. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, we got to change that. The other thing I thought was really interesting is, so again, Shakespeare had done this before. He with Queen Elizabeth, he had written plays that were kind of like to her interests. And again, if you're needing funding in an audience, it's kind of good to ingratiate yourself with the people in charge. So obviously, Macbeth has the Scottish ties for the new Scottish king, but also the use of the occult and having the witches and everything. That was a specific interest of James the First.
Oh, really?
Before James the First ever became King of England, he had written a book about demonology that was like published.
Oh, that's wild. I didn't know that.
So he was very, very interested in the whole witchcraft, occult, demon stuff, and literally published a book called Demonology in the late 1500s. So Shakespeare combined not just the Scottish stuff, but with the occult as well, was all specifically tailored to James I's interests. So yeah, go ahead and drop us some Lady Macbeth truth.
Okay, yeah, so the character of Lady Macbeth is based on a real historical figure who is actually, again, not a ton is known about her because she was a woman in the 11th century. But she is best known for being the wife of Macbeth. But her name, it
starts with a G.
Do you know how to pronounce that in real? It looks like, when I first saw it, I thought it said Grouch.
Let me say it again.
But it's Gruoch. So is it Gruoch? I have no idea.
Groak sounds okay. Groak?
These old Gaelic names are so hard. I don't get it. Man. Anyways, so she was actually married, before she was married to Macbeth, she was married to Gil Cogmain Mac Mail Brigdy, who was the Mortimer of Moray before Macbeth was. Then he's killed. That guy is killed, probably by Macbeth, actually. And then she marries Macbeth, who is her former husband's cousin and possibly his murderer.
Wow.
I guess it's not really, no one's really sure whether that's like Macbeth is like, oh, I'm conquering, I'm the victor, so to the victor goes the spoil, so I get my former enemy's wife. Or if it's like, oh, well, she doesn't have a husband anymore, and so I'm going to like help her out and be her husband. That's not really clear, but either way, they got married, and then they didn't have any children together. I guess she had a child from her previous marriage who actually briefly succeeded Macbeth as King of Scotland, but just for a couple months before then Malcolm comes back and takes the throne again. But that's actually Macbeth's stepson, Luloch.
Yes. So that's actually who Malcolm boots off the throne, is not Macbeth, but Luloch, right? Or I guess or it's kind of both. It's kind of both. Then
Macbeth.
He defeats Macbeth, but then Luloch takes the throne. And
he defeats Macbeth. Luloch gets the throne for a couple months. He boots him off the throne.
Right.
And then at some point in history, Gruoch dies, and it says that there were some sources that said it was suicide, but no one knows if that's true, and it is just as likely to be true as to be not true, and no one knows. Really, not a ton is known about her, because she's really only known for her association with these other monarchs in Scotland.
Right, and because Macbeth was not as Machiavellian as he is in the play, the idea that his wife is then aiding that Machiavellianness is not likely.
And that's like the thing with Macbeth and Gruoch and like all of these people, is this was like, even at the time that Shakespeare wrote the play, this was like pretty obscure historical stuff. I mean, this was 500 years before Shakespeare.
Right.
So it's like, it was already kind of obscure, and then like it's kind of like we were talking about in the last Duel episode. Like the only reason that those people have Wikipedia pages is because that guy wrote a book about them. Like the only reason that people have been digging into Macbeth for this long, like the actual Macbeth,
right,
is because Shakespeare wrote a play about him.
Right, we would never have heard about him. They'd be as obscure as, anybody else that you can't name because they're
exactly
obscure.
Like think any of the other, vassal state rulers of wherever at that time, like he would be just as obscure as any of them. But because Shakespeare writes a play, now this dude is like, super famous for 1,000 years after his death.
So so let's look at the kids. So then, so Malcolm. First Macduff. So in the play and the film, it's Macduff who defeats Macbeth, but that all seems to be made up. There was a Duff who was king of Scotland like 100 years before Duncan and Macbeth. Yeah. And so that may be where he got the name, but that was just kind of a filler. It is Malcolm who kind of just in his own right takes Macbeth and Lulloch out and then rules for 35 years actually. And so Malcolm's daughter, Matilda, marries Henry I of England, and so Malcolm, who we see in the play here, played by Dudley Dursley, is is the grandfather of Empress Matilda, who we're big fans of here.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think we even mentioned that too, when we talked about Empress Matilda being like the hourglass
of all
of the Scottish royalty and all of the English royalty. Yeah.
Yeah. This is her mother's side is the Scottish side, and her maternal grandfather is Malcolm. Now, the ages of the kids, so we don't know exactly when Malcolm was born, but it's actually pretty likely he would have been a little kid when his father died. So maybe more like 9 years old as opposed to an adult. And it does look like, though, after Malcolm's death, they did flee the country, though, for their safety, which that is in the play. But again, they would have been kids fleeing to safety with other people, not like adults who then get accused of the murder and all that kind of stuff. So that's all made up.
Right.
But also, too, the timeline, too, the film and the play give you no indication that Macbeth is on the throne for 17 years. Yeah. So when Malcolm goes into hiding, then 17 years pass and he comes back from exile and now is a man in his 20s after the throne.
Right.
And he successfully gets it. Let's see. It was Malcolm, not Macduff, who killed Macbeth in battle. Again, I don't know if he literally killed him in battle, but it was also interesting too. So the Wikipedia page, and they're quoting another source as well. They say he then also killed Lulloch, quote, by treachery. So
cool.
And and Lulloch was more of a. He wasn't long for the world anyway. Technically, he's succeeding Macbeth by virtue of being his stepson, but he was not. He was basically a non-king. Like he would have been a puppet ruler forever else, and he was easy to kick off the throne right after Macbeth.
I mean, it sounds even like a bigger deal than it is, and it doesn't even sound like that big of a deal. Like, oh, he was king for a couple months, but like. You have to realize that at that time, he was king basically long enough for Malcolm to walk from wherever the battle was to wherever he was to go, boot him off the throne. Like, that's the only reason that he was king for that amount of time. However long it was between Malcolm walking that distance.
Right. If Malcolm had a car, Lulloch is never king.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then what's interesting, so Malcolm had kids, but Donalbain actually swoops in after Malcolm's death and defeats his own nephews to claim the throne in his own right. So Donalbain's a very minor character in the play as just Malcolm's younger brother, and then Malcolm becomes king. But Donalbain basically usurps his nephews in his 60s to then rule for just like a year, and then his nephews take over anyway. So I guess you forget that it's like even back then. I guess it's just the ego of being king thing that he's in his 60s and I want it, it's mine.
Yep.
And takes it, but then again, he only lasts a year, and then his nephews succeed him anyway. It's also important to note that we keep saying King of Scotland, King of Scotland, King of Scotland.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
This is not them controlling all of modern Scotland. Again, borders were soft. The territories shifted. It was much smaller. Yes. There were regional kings. Like you even kind of mentioned that Macbeth was almost kind of a vassal king to Duncan in a different area. So it was just all chaotic.
Right. And when we're talking about this is before there is even like an England.
Right.
Like this is pre William the Conqueror.
Right. This is all in that Mercia, Northumbria time period.
Yeah.
And
actually,
then,
like Duncan was fighting battles against Northumbrians
right
before he goes to fight Macbeth in Moray.
Right. So all kinds of complicated, and basically, what made you a king? You call yourself a king, and if anybody's got a problem with it, they can come fight you.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it is literally the exact same stuff that we see in Vikings.
Yeah.
It's the same. I mean, it's contemporary to that stuff, basically.
Yeah. Literally, it's about 100 years after the show, but like, yeah, it's right. It's all in that same ballpark. Right. Yeah. It will be contemporary to the sequel, I guess. Then
I was going to say, I think it is going to be. It's contemporary to, the new show that's coming out, because Canute the Great is a character in that show, and he is contemporary to these guys.
Yes, absolutely.
And like Edward the Confessor is contemporary to these guys.
Right. Yeah, so actually, I'd almost be surprised if they don't include Duncan or Macbeth or Malcolm or somebody in that show, just because that's kind of what...
like a cameo or something?
Oh, good. Well, it's what they like to do. And the other thing I thought was interesting and kind of worth noting, just because all this stuff is cool, that in this culture, specifically they said like Gaelic cultures, the norm was when you seized the throne, your first course of action then was to raid a neighbor territory. Just as like almost like a rite of passage or like an initiation rite was the new king's got to invade the neighbors just to kind of like strut his stuff. And they were even kind of talking about like some of these skirmishes. They almost be token skirmishes. Like I forget if it was Malcolm or Duncan or who. I think it was Malcolm, but just like, oh, I'm just going to raid Linda's farm real quick so I can say I did it, but I don't actually want to piss you off. I don't know, just little things like that. I think we covered all our bases now, actually.
Well, it's too early to talk about award stuff, but like we said, it's probably getting cinematography, some technicals, just because it's so cool visually. I would say at least Denzel gets an acting nomination. Maybe Frances McDormand.
I agree, Denzel's the most likely.
Yeah. I don't think it gets a screenwriting nomination just because it's the whole, it's just Shakespeare thing.
Right.
Maybe a directing.
I think there's a decent chance of that too, just because of the decisions he made are kind of so bold.
Yeah, and I think if it does get a Best Picture nomination, it's probably... I don't think it wins just because...
No.
Just because Shakespeare itself is just kind of a more of a niche thing. But I think it might get nominated, especially if they nominate like a high number. Like if they nominate, 7, 8, 9 movies, I'm sure it gets at least one of those.
Well, so here's what increased the odds drastically. This year they've actually made a shift in the rules. It's a fixed 10. There will be 10 nominees.
Oh, okay. Then I think it for sure gets
a
nomination. Just looking at it, it has it has been nominated for some other awards already. Like Denzel Washington is nominated for a SAG award. AFI had it in their top 10 of the year. So like it's gonna get some awards. I think it's just a matter of how many. Also, and this is a really, really minor thing, but you kind of mentioned it in passing. But I do like Harry Melling. He's Dudley Dursley.
Oh, yeah.
He's been in,
Queen's Gambit.
I know him as Dudley Dursley. I actually haven't seen Queen's Gambit.
Oh, so good. It's good.
I know he's in it, but I haven't seen him in it. The other thing that I know him from is actually The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which, again, is another... I've brought that movie up 1,000 times on this podcast, but another, Coen Brothers connection. He's the kid in Ballad of Buster Scruggs with no arms and no legs that Liam Neeson carries around.
That's right.
And has him recite Shakespeare.
Yeah. Interesting. Good call. That's crazy. He's lost so much weight. I didn't recognize him for the longest time. Like, even after, it wasn't until after I was finished with Queen's Gambit that I think my mom was like, well, that's Dudley Dursley. I'm like, wait, what?
When I saw him in Ballad of Buster Scruggs, I was like, that looks like Dudley Dursley.
I didn't notice at all.
My thought was like, I wonder if they're related.
Oh.
And then I looked it up. I was like, oh, that's just him. He just lost weight. He just lost all of his...
Right. He was just a chubby kid. Now he's in his 20s or whatever. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Or pushing 30, I guess. Yeah, so Tragedy of Macbeth by Joel Coen is currently sitting at a 93/81 on Rotten Tomatoes. So pretty solid. Not surprisingly, Shakespeare's probably almost always going to be higher on the critics' side.
Yeah.
Even a bad adaptation would probably be higher on the critics' side.
Yeah.
But yes, I did enjoy it. Visually, it is amazing. And if you are not a Shakespeare fan, I would say this is actually, like Logan, you were saying, probably a good introductory film to maybe get you a little interested. It might feel slow if you struggle with the language, but the visuals are so cool, and it's a story of murder and insanity. So, I mean, hopefully that can keep you engaged too. So we'll call this your starter film for Shakespeare if you're not a fan already.
Yeah, I would say that it's, if you don't really like Shakespeare, like me, just go into it like you're watching a movie like The Green Knight. And I think that's like the thing that I'm like most comparing it to, just because it's like, it's another A24 movie.
It's an arty movie. It's an arty movie as opposed to a traditional kind of popcorn movie.
Set in medieval England. Well, this was in Scotland, but yeah, and even in that movie, that's like an Arthurian legend, and like the dialogue is kind of weird and doesn't really track with, our modern dialogue and how we talk now, but it's like just visually, it's really cool. The vibes are really cool. That one's a little more showy as far as the visuals, but this one is, it's really special. I think even if you don't like the Shakespeare stuff, go see it just to see how cool it looks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You can almost play this have it muted and just in the background as like an art piece. It's a gorgeous film.
Yeah, but the thing with Shakespeare, though, is that it doesn't sound like anything we would talk like today. But if you like read it, it's really not that far removed from modern English. I mean, yes, it's 500 years ago or 400 years.
Shakespeare is modern English, technically. It is considered modern English.
Right. And like you can understand it. Like if you look at it long enough, you'll be like, okay, I kind of get what's going on.
Okay, yeah.
But it is something that you kind of have to practice though. Where it's like, okay, if I know what's going on, it's almost like learning another language, but you're just learning English better. It's like, okay, if I know what's going on, I know what they're talking about, and then I, see this whatever sentence on the page, or I hear it on the stage or in a movie. You do that enough times, and you're like, oh, okay, I know what that means, even though it doesn't sound like anything I would ever say or any conversation I would ever have in real life.
Right. Oh, and I meant, because it's bonus episode, I have a little bit of feedback I wanted to share. So one, Mrs. Hibbs did reply and said she was very excited to see that we were doing that. She messages you guys and just kind of thought it was cool to hear the banter back and forth and all that kind of stuff. So,
oh, cool.
Thumbs up from Mrs. Hibbs. And then on Reddit, I just got it was when I posted the Genghis Khan versus Queen Elizabeth episode. What I wrote was, in which we see if the wits and spies of Elizabeth are a match for the mounted archers of the Mongol horde. And then someone replied, Elizabeth waits for the Mongol steppe ponies and archers to drown in the channel. End of story. So yeah, shout out to Zoe Tropo on Reddit, who just kind of said, yeah, Elizabeth is on an island. She'll just wait them out and win.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because
the
correct.
Dothraki won't cross the narrow sea.
Yes, and the poison water.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah. So yes, thanks for listening. Let's see. I'm going to get this out as soon as possible. So we should be in the midst of our tournament, and I think we're kind of in the middle of narrowing down who makes the final four of our tournament for most interesting person in history. So check that out as well, and we'll catch you later.